Welcome back to our module on creating agile governance. So what we're going to do in this session and the next session is just talk through a couple of the meeting practices that I touched on briefly in the last session. And in this session, we're going to look at the governance meetings and the integrative decision-making process that Holacracy developed for these kind of meetings. Now, let me say up front that the purpose of me sharing this with you is so that you can start to get a feel for this kind of meeting, to tell you a bit about my experience of working with it. I don't believe that by the end of this session you can then go out and be completely competent in facilitating these yourselves. And I'd highly recommend that you look at more of the material that Holacracy One have developed on this, and maybe find other facilitators living near you who've had some experience working with these processes as well, because the facilitation of these meetings is absolutely key to their success. By all means, go out and try it in a kind of safe context, because that's how you'll build up the experience yourself. But there is some good learning to be had from the experience that Holacracy One have developed and facilitators who have worked with them on these kind of processes. Well, at the Center for Human Emergence, we were one of the early adopters of this approach, and so started experimenting with it ourselves, and there's been much learning from our own process in this and from others since that time. So if we remember the governance meetings, the job of the governance meeting is to focus on the how of the organization, how we run the organization. And basically there's only a couple of outputs that you'd expect from a governance meeting. Either a policy, which defines how we do something, or new accountabilities or roles. So it's only if we don't know how to do something that comes into the governance process. Any other issues belong basically in other meeting structures. So imagine we're in a governance meeting. We have them regularly. Once a month we had with the Center for Human Emergence. It depends on your content. Actually, the first thing we do is we check in. So we spend some time just arriving as humans in the room. And the way we always did that, using some of the circle practices actually we talked about earlier, was just to say how you're doing at this moment. So allow the human to be present. Well, I had a really bad night, the kids were up, or I know I'm feeling really cool, or I'm really buzzy at the moment because there's loads of stuff going on, or whatever. But it allows the person to be present in the room, and also gives other people information, so that if some point somebody's looking a little sleepy and they've had a bad night, then it allows you to be more understanding for that context. So a kind of check-in, it brings everybody present, brings everybody's voices into the room. And once we've set that, we then start to build an agenda. And the way we build an agenda is by asking, what are the present tensions that anybody has? So what are the things which don't seem to be working right now that you need some insight on to be able to move forward? And really focusing on the present tensions, not speculative tensions. Well, I'm concerned that maybe, in a few months' time this or that will happen. Well, if that's not affecting the way you're doing your work at the moment, then it's not a present tension. It's a potential future tension. And when it arises, then we'll deal with it. But really a discipline around sticking to tensions that are present now keeps us connected to what's real now and allows us to take the next steps. So we build an agenda based on present tensions. And as we come to each agenda point, let's say you start with one of the agenda points, it's really important to spend time digging into the tension itself, really getting an understanding for the tension. What's really at the core of this tension that you're bringing in? You remember one of the principles we have at Ubiquity is around creative tension. And the greater clarity you can get around the tension, real understanding of it, the more you can really feel the tension, the more likelihood it is that your system is going to come up with some way of transcending the tension. So really make sure we've understood the tension. When we started using the practice and we moved too quickly on to trying to get to proposals, then we found we wasted a lot of time, because when we ended up coming back to trying to really understand what the essence of that tension was. So spend time at the beginning really trying to understand the tensions. What is it that's not working for you? What's really the core of it? Once you've got that, you can then move on to the next step, where we present a proposal. And it may be that the person who has the tension already has an initial proposal. Or it may be that they don't. If they don't, then you just explore the tension deeper, make sure everybody understands it, and see if anybody has an initial starting proposal. A proposal of how to transcend the tension, how to resolve the challenge. And what's important at this point when you're coming up with proposals is that they don't have to be perfect. In fact, it's better to start with just a kind of partly formed proposal, because it'll get formed and developed through this decision-making process. So just come up with an initial proposal, and it really challenges a lot of traditional approaches, because when you come up with your proposal, you mustn't be too attached to it, because it's highly likely that it's going to evolve over time. So there's a practice of bringing a proposal in and then releasing it to the circle, releasing it to the meeting, and allowing it to be developed and molded over time, no longer seeing it as yours. You see, because ultimately when you presence attention as a soul in a role, as we often said, then you are doing it for the organization. It's not about you. Remember the law of impersonality? It's not about you. It's something you have brought in from the organization. It's information that you're bringing in through your role to the organization. So as you bring in a proposal, you allow it to be there for the organization and to see which direction it's going to go. So we've got to a point where there's an initial proposal for how to deal with the tension. The next step we take is clarifying questions. And these are questions to make sure that everybody really understands the proposal that's on the table. It's very important to distinguish at this point between opinions about the proposal and clarifying questions. We're not looking yet for opinions about the proposal. We're looking at clarifying the question. Have we really all understood what this person is proposing? Because if we haven't, then that's going to lead to a lot of confusion later on as we start to check whether this proposal is really workable. So clarifying questions, have we really understood what the proposal is that's on the table? The next round is what's called the reaction round. And this is a great round, and it's, I think, a very clever element of the design. Because in the reaction round, it basically allows you as a human being to give your initial kind of gut reaction to the proposal. So we're saying, you know, let's go around and how does this feel to you as a person? How does this feel to you? And that can be, oh, it feels great, or oh, I really didn't like it, or whatever. But this gut reaction round allows the human being to be present and voice how they're feeling about this proposal. Now, there's an important distinction that we make there, because when it comes to the objection round, as to whether we have an objection to this, whether we don't think this is workable, the question is not, do you not like the proposal? The question is this workable for the organization? And that's a difference. You may not like it personally for all sorts of personal reasons, but it may well be workable for the organization. So what the reaction round does is it allows space for you as a person just to voice your joy or irritation or your reaction to the proposal. Get that out of the way, allow it to be there, and then move on to looking at the proposal from the perspective of the organization and what's right for the organization at that time. So that's when we move on to the amend and clarify, because sometimes in those gut reaction rounds, you still realize that there's something in the proposal that it would be very easy to change to dissolve some of the tension that came out in the gut reaction round. So the proposer gets a chance to either clarify something which wasn't clarified in the earlier rounds, or amend something so that we can move forward really to see if the proposal's workable. So then we move into the objection round. And there's a real discipline here in the objection round, because the question is there anything that anybody from their role senses would stop this from being a workable proposal? And that's if it's an objection, it means that you feel that taking this step now would significantly damage the organization, would be a really bad thing to do, because you're holding a perspective from the organization, from your role, and you can see that this wouldn't work. There's a real discipline about that, and sticking to the question of, is it workable for now? Not, well, maybe something, oh yeah, I think that maybe from my perspective, you know, if we do this, then a while down the line, this might happen. That doesn't count, because that's speculation. We'll deal with that if it comes up when we get to it. But the question is now, given everything you know now from your perspective, is this proposal workable? If it is, when we go around and check, you say, yeah, that's workable for now. We can move forward, and then we'll gather data and see what happens. If you've got an objection from your perspective, then you name the objection. It gets listed on the flip chart or however you're capturing the objections. And we go around, list out the objections, and then we start to go into them. And then it opens up more. So you'll feel it's been quite a structured process for now. So let's say there's an objection that has been tabled. We make sure that we really understand from the person who brought in the objection what the objection is. And in my experience, actually, just that phase of clarifying the objection, sometimes the objection dissolves because it's just been a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. So important to take time to really make sure we've properly understood the objection, the information that somebody's bringing in. If it is, though, if it's still there after you've clarified things and we all agree, oh yeah, we understand that this is a significant objection. So it is something that if we were to do it now, we can really feel that this would get in the way of the organization. Then you just start collectively to feel into how might we integrate this objection? How could we come up with an amendment to the proposal that would allow us to make sure that this objection is taken care of? And that's a collective exploration. And then once you've got a next proposal, an amended proposal, it comes back to the circle for a new objection round. And you only move on with a proposal once everybody has said they believe that it's workable. Now, one of the questions I had at the beginning of this process was, well, what happens if you never get to a workable proposal? Well, funnily enough, in all the years I've been working with this approach, I've never had that. Because, and when I think about why, it's because if the tension is real that somebody is feeling, then it's likely that somewhere there is a solution that we can move forward with. Often, it has been that the proposal that finally comes out of the exploration looks quite different to the initial proposal that's been brought in. But we nearly always, in fact, we always, in my experience, get somewhere that ends up being a workable next step for the system. So that's the integration round. So that's basically how it works, and you just work through your agenda, dealing with the tensions. And this is why the facilitator's role is so important, because you really got to hold the discipline of the process. The process works, and even if we're not comfortable with it, and in the first couple of months of us using it, it's like kind of wearing a little bit of a straitjacket because you're forced into this process. But as you get into it and develop the discipline, you really see how the process helps you to be more effective. And once you've got that and more internalized the process, then you can kind of sit with it a little bit more lightly and make some little adaptations that maybe fit your culture more, but really make sure that you're holding to the core of the approach. So that's how this integrative decision-making process works to deal with governance issues. As I say, you hopefully have now got a bit of a feel for it and can see how it might work. If you want to really practice it, you could experiment in your own context. Do see some of the resources in the resource library and kind of work through it a bit more, or consult some of the folks who have experience working with holacracy. But you can also try it on your own. I'm not saying you have to do months of training to be able to do this. But it does require a certain discipline, and that's important to say. You can't just kind of take a piece of this and then try to work with it. In my experience, the approach does require that you really adopt it fully in a disciplined way to reap the benefits of it. So what we'll do in the next session is we'll take a look at what the operational meetings look like from this approach.